Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Well, welcome to So Many Books, So Little Time. My name is Joe Nash. I'm here with Zina Shevchik. We are both librarians here at the Colonie Library. This is show number 8. So if you don't know what the show's all about, I'll briefly give you the setup. Zina and I go down to the new book shelf here in the library, and we go to our technical services department. We bring up a whole bunch of new books, both fiction and nonfiction, and we're going to tell you about some of these new books. They're mostly books you probably may not have heard of or read about, and probably not on the bestseller list because we figure everyone knows all about them. So, as usual, Zina will go first, so take it away.
All right. I'm starting out my picks with a book called Curtains, Adventures of an Undertaker in Training by Tom Jokinen. I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm just going to read from the back flap. This is just something a little bit different about the undertaking business. On the back of the book it says, this is the beginning of the book, 2 rules for picking up a body at the hospital, known as a removal. Make sure it's the right one. This business, when you shake it down to first principles, is the burial or cremation of the dead. 2 relatively irreversible acts. Mistakes are frowned upon. Please check the ID tag carefully. I won't read the second rule, but that sets the tone of the book. It's wry humor, but it also contains a lot of technical information. And one of the reviewers said it was kind of an update of a classic in the field, funeral home business, called An American Way of Death by Jessica Mitford, which was written in 1963 and is considered a classic on the topic. And this is much more current, and it talks about how the funeral home business has changed, how they're anticipating that by the year 2025, 60% of us baby boomers will be changing the industry by opting for cremation, which is economically going to, and already has apparently changed and changing the funeral home business, and a lot of people involved with burial, people who operate the cars, the hearse, the monument makers, the casket makers are all feeling the change in the industry. But it also has lots of technical information that some people may shy away from, but the reviewers say that he handles it very with great respect, and he at the end he has great respect for the people, the funeral home directors who deal with the families and the people's last journey. So for something different, Curtains, Adventures of an Undertaker in Training.
Okay.
Joe?
Well, Zina, I didn't know you were going to do that book first because I have a book here. It's kind of ironic I'm doing this book. It's called Housing Options for Senior Adults in the Capital District. This is a book that's come out, this is a 3rd edition, just came out in January 2010, and it's the kind of book you may not know that we have here in the library, and we have one. This is a book you can check out, obviously, but we also have reference copies. And what the book is, it tells you all about, if you're thinking of senior housing, but all different kinds. It explains each kind. Let's see, subsidized rental housing, Section 8 rental assistance, adult care facilities, nursing homes, family-type homes, independent living places. I think the Beltrone here in Colonie is considered independent living. They're in here. Independent, non-age specific, and market rate housing. I'm not sure what that is. But the book is set up by county. Albany, Rensselaer, Saratoga, and Schenectady. I'll just turn it around quick. Each place, you can sort of see that each picture there is the facility, the home. And each one tells you building information, how many units, what it costs. They don't all have the price. Some say not available, but a lot of them do. It tells you who to call. It tells you if pets are allowed, age requirements. And it's divided up by the categories I just mentioned. Subsidized rental housing, Section 8 rental assistant, adult care, nursing homes, family type homes, retirement living, and independent places. So this book is used a lot actually in our reference department. So if you're out there thinking of senior living in any of the ways I just mentioned, this is an indispensable book for our area. So it's called Housing Options for Senior Adults in the Capital Region, covering Albany, Rensselaer, Saratoga, and Schenectady County, spiral bound. So it's a nice book. And I think there's probably hundreds of places in here. I didn't really count them all, but definitely it's brand new, 2010, all up-to-date information. So
I'm looking at the yellow dot, so that is a circulating
this
copy.
book, yes, you can come in and check this book out. But we do have a reference copy because people want to just come in and use it in the library if this one's checked out. But
Okay, that's what I just wanted to make sure that we have a copy that can circulate as well as in the reference collection.
very practical book.
Right.
Okay, Zina.
Okay, the next one is a fun book. It's called Birdology, B-I-R-D, and it's got pictures of chickens, hens. No, those are roosters. Are those roosters?
I think so,
they're
yes.
roosters. We're so close to the farm and the land, Joe and I, by Cy Montgomery, who wrote The Good Pig, I think a year or two ago, which was a bestseller about her family's living with this huge pig they named Christopher Hogwood, and all the life lessons they learned from their pig. And she works with animals, loves animals, and here she's talking all things about birds. And the subtitle is Adventures with a Pack of Hens, a Peck of Pigeons, Cantankerous Crows, Fierce Falcons, Hip-Hop Parrots, Baby Hummingbirds, and one murderously big living dinosaur. And she talks about birds as being far stranger and more wondrous, and at the same time more like us than we might have dared to imagine. And she talks about 7 rules of birdology, and those are the headings for her chapters. Birds are individuals. Birds are dinosaurs. Birds are made of air. That's about hummingbirds. Birds are fierce. That's about hawks. Birds find their way home. Pigeons. Birds could talk about parrots. And then for crows, birds are everywhere. The dinosaur is about a cassowary, which is a kind of bird that's in Australia. And let's see, she describes it as a 150-pound, man-tall, flightless bird with a helmet of bone on its head and a slashing, razor-like toenail with which it occasionally eviscerates people. But the book has gotten lots of kudos, and the reviewers call it a book written with impeccable science and profound respect. So, animal lovers, Cy Montgomery's Birdology. Joe?
Well, her last book, The Good Pig, was very popular.
It really was, yes.
Well, all right, well, I'm going to go to a new biography of my favorite author. I mean, it's tough to pick one, but if you really had to pin me down, my favorite author is Mark Twain. This new book is called Lighting Out for the Territory, How Samuel Clemens Headed West and Became Mark Twain. And of course, we all know where the title comes from at the end of Huck Finn. That's what he says at the very end. He's lighting out for the territory. And this book only covers a small period of his life, but probably the most important period, and probably one of the least written about. When he ended up becoming a riverboat pilot, unfortunately, he could never practice his trade, the one thing he wanted to do the most, because the Civil War started. And after a brief sojourn in a Southern regiment, he went out west with his brother to be his secretary. His brother was appointed secretary of the Nevada Territory, and Mark Twain went as his secretary. So if a lot of the adventures in that part of his life are recounted in Mark Twain's book, Roughing It, an absolutely laugh-out-loud funny book. I don't know if you've ever read Roughing It. It's really absolutely hilarious. But this book just covers that one period in his life. I think obviously a lot of it's based on Roughing It, but when Mark Twain, he had a lot of adventures. He was a silver miner. He worked for a small newspaper. He visited the Mormons. He ended up going to Hawaii and reporting for a paper in San Francisco. And he wrote his first famous story, The Jumping Frog of, was it Calvarius County, where he took the pen name Mark Twain. So this is the period where he became Mark Twain, like the title says. So, lighting out for the territory, how Samuel Clemens headed west and became Mark Twain. And I'll just say, read Roughing It too by Mark Twain. It's absolutely hilarious. Well, Zina?
Am I right that Mark Twain, the name refers to evaluating the depth?
Yes, off the riverboats.
Off the riverboats.
Mark Twain meant safe water.
There you go. That's what I thought.
I've read a lot of biographies of Mark Twain, so I know all about it.
It's been a long time since I read Mark Twain, probably my adolescence. So it's time for me to pick him up again. All right, my next book is a history book. It's about the Army Nurse Corps in Vietnam War. It's in pink with a woman in Army fatigues at the top. Officer, Nurse, Woman, the Army Nurse Corps in the Vietnam War by Kara Dixon Buick. And this is a scholarly treatise on the nursing corps during the Vietnam War. And the scholar who wrote this book, because she's an assistant professor, don't remember what college, she drew on more than 100 interviews. So she lets the nurses tell their own stories, including their reasons for joining the military. And a lot of them it wasn't for political reasons. Most of them thought of themselves as nurses first, caretakers, nurturers, and how the experience of being basically in the war, because they were often just yards away from where the fighting was, how it changed them and their approach to nursing. It talks about how many of them weren't prepared either as nurses or as military people for what they experienced in Vietnam. And they talk about the Army nurses in the Vietnam War being forced to do more than nurses were expected to do back in America. They took on a lot more responsibility in the surgical units, the medical units in the midst of the war, and yet they were women were not in the military in combat at that time, and their experience in the war when they came back and they were not allowed to take on the kind of responsibility that they faced during the war changed their approach to their lives and their nursing as well. And it kind of compares what's going on in the States at that time with the feminist revolution, and how the nurses, when they were there in Vietnam, they still thought of themselves as traditional women in the traditional roles. It's fascinating. I was a college age at the time of the Vietnam War, and so it meant a lot. It means a lot to me to read this. There are some of the chapter headings about gender and a changing army. It's called An Officer and a Gentleman, and not all women who wore love beads in the 60s, post-war depictions of nurses. So I recommend it. Officer, Nurse, Woman, the Army Nurse Corps in the Vietnam War. Joe?
Okay, here's a book right in front of me here. It is called Voodoo Histories, the Role of the Conspiracy Theory in Shaping Modern History. And I'm kind of smiling because we seem to be surrounded by conspiracy theories all the time, particularly since the book The Da Vinci Code came out. So this book is written by David Aronovich. He's an English journalist, and he takes on the main conspiracies of our time, all of them, starting with landing on the moon. Some people don't believe we landed on the moon. FDR and Pearl Harbor, and of course, what book wouldn't be complete with a JFK assassination section? He's got a thing about the protocols of the Elders of Zion, a book that purports to be the blueprints for Jewish global domination. And let's see, what else is in here? I was looking through it.
You're a cynic.
I know. Anything to do with Da Vinci Code, 9/11, the birthers. That's a newer one, the birthers.
Obama?
Yes. And he goes through, from what I've gathered, I haven't read it yet, but he goes through a lot of stuff with, let me see, the McCarthy period. But the point is, he goes through most of these I just mentioned, and others, and pretty thoroughly debunks all of them. But he also tries to get into why do people believe these conspiracy theories, and so he goes into a lot of history. He goes into the origin of all these conspiracy theories. And it's kind of a long book, but it looks very interesting. And just to give you a flavor of why he wrote the book, I'll just read you the last 2 sentences of the book. You'll understand why he's might pique your interest. He says, "I have written this book because I believe that conspiracies aren't powerful. Instead, it is the idea of conspiracies that has power." So if that would pique your interest, I was looking through the book. It looks very interesting. And some of the ones, like when he talks about landing on the moon, thousands and thousands of people would have been involved in that. And there's no way. I can't help laughing because some of the things in here are just so off the charts. And so many people, he tries to understand, and he talks to people, and a lot of the authors of all these books he's talked to, and he tries to get into, like, why do people believe this stuff? And why do these people, and so it looks pretty interesting. So, Voodoo Histories, The Role of the Conspiracy Theory in Shaping Modern History by David Aronovich. It's okay.
All right. This is real stuff. Quilts, 1700 to 2010, Hidden Histories, Untold Stories, edited by Sue Pritchard. It's a catalog of quilts and stories about, along with the quilts, and it's about a presentation, an exhibit rather, at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. The book is 2010, so I couldn't find the exact exhibit dates. I don't know if that's what's going on now. Not that many of you would run right over the pond to see the Victoria and Albert Museum in London at this time, but it's a beautiful book, an absolutely stunning book, right from the opening page here, and it shows what was used. I mean, it's just amazing. It shows sorry, tripping over my words. It shows all sorts of clothing that was made by quilters through the years, and it shows what a sense of community quilting created for so many communities. It shows actual garments that were worn by kings and princes, and it tells the story behind a whole array of quilts that are on display. It also has photographs of women quilting, like during World War II, for the cause, for the boys. And it shows a lot of painting by famous painters and artists on the topic of quilting. Now I have to find it, see if I can. So it's a beautiful book. It's history and art at the same time. And for something different, quilt, 1700 to 2010. Hidden Histories, Untold Stories.
Well, the quilt section in our library is very large, and a lot of books, not just pictures and how-to and history. So they're always very popular.
So people who are quilting, it says they're 746. This book would be.
Yes, they'll all be up. That's a big section in our library.
How-to.
There's how-to and history and photographs. They're all in the same spot.
Okay.
Okay, now I'm trying to think. This is 2010. About 4 years ago or so, I'm going to name 4 authors, and you probably have heard of them. Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, and Christopher Hitchens, all at the time, about 4 years ago, wrote books, and all four books made the bestseller list. They were books about atheism. And the books, they all came out around the same time, so a lot of times the books were written about together, and So collectively, they're known as the New Atheists. And at the time those books came out, they're all very popular. At the time those books came out, there was also some books that were sort of the opposite of atheism, books about belief. And one of the books was written by Francis S. Collins called The Language of God. And he's one of the world's leading geneticists. I think he worked on the human genome. And anyway, this is Francis S. Collins' new book. I think it's sort of an answer to The New Atheists, the four authors. This is, he's the editor of this book. It's called Belief, Readings on the Reasons for Faith. And what he's done is he's collected little essays and selections from various authors all through history, obviously making the case for belief, for faith, I guess you should say. And he starts getting started. It starts with an essay by N.T. Wright, a famous theologian and New Testament scholar, I think. And then he sort of goes through, there's a section called Classic Arguments for Faith and Reason, Plato, St. Augustine, John Locke, Thomas Aquinas. And then he has a section called, The Meaning of Truth, Faith in the Evil and Suffering, and some of the faith and the cry for justice, love and forgiveness as pointers to God. And it concludes with a section called The Irrationality of Atheism. So, but anyway, all the people that he has selections from are a wide range of thinkers, from authors. We have Plato, I already said that, Dorothy Sayers, Madeleine L'Engle, John Stott, Desmond Tutu, Elie Wiesel, Martin Luther King Jr., John Polkinghorne, who's a famous physicist, Thomas Merton, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Viktor Frankl, so you get the idea, G.K. Chesterton, and Anthony Flew. So this is a collection by Francis S. Collins. As I say, it's called Belief, Readings on the Reason for Faith. And I guess I should say, in order to be fair, this is not a new book I'm going to talk about, but one of the aforementioned one of the New Atheists, Christopher Hitchens, put together a book just like this for the non-believer. So this is not a new book, but in the interest of being fair, I guess I'll just show it. It's called The Portable Atheist.
Both sides of the story.
Yes. Essential Readings for the Non-Believer. And he did the same thing. This book came out 2 years ago, so it's kind of new still. He did the same thing that Francis Collins did. He takes 47 different people through history, obviously readings for the non-believer. I'll just read you a few. Thomas Hobbes, Spinoza, David Hume, James Boswell, Karl Marx, George Eliot, Darwin, Anatole France, Thomas Hardy, Emma Goldman, H.P. Lovecraft, but he's got a little bit of everybody in here. Penn Jillette, he's right up to modern times. So anyway, this is the new book, Belief, Readings on the Reason for Faith. Here's one that's kind of new, The Portable Atheist. And this is edited by Christopher Hitchens, which is one of the four authors I mentioned first. So just trying to be fair there.
Even I know who Christopher
People
Hitchens
over
is.
here. Okay.
I know who Christopher Hitchens is. He's on television a lot.
Oh, yes.
Right, with one point of view. But it's interesting to listen to. He is. I picked this up in Technical Services New Books because I don't read this kind of thing. And one thing I like about doing this show is that I am being allowed to spend my work time looking at books that I normally wouldn't think to pick up. This is, the publisher classifies this as urban fantasy. Joe knew about this author. Joe knows. Joe is very well read, much more well read than I am. I had never heard of this person, this author. His name is Charles DeLint. Do you think that's how it's Charles DeLint. This collection of stories, Muse and Reverie, and it says a Newford collection. This is, we classify his books in science fiction in our library, and some of them are in young adult, but in the reviews it's called a general adult book. It's all the stories, this is his 5th collection of stories revolving around a city he's made up called Newford. And there are 13 stories, and they're all, Newford is portrayed as kind of not an unusual city. And it's people experience the same things the rest of us humans do, poverty, work, relationship troubles, etc. But there are situations that arise in all these stories where the main human characters interact with mystical beings, or fantastical situations arise that wouldn't normally in our world as we know it. I actually found it I find the stories very, it was very easy to read. It didn't seem like fantasy or science fiction to me. Even the interactions between the human beings and the otherworldly beings they seemed believable to me, and I enjoyed reading. I read about 3 or 4 of the stories, and I highly recommend it as a beginning, to begin that kind of journey of trying something new in reading. Urban fantasy, science fiction, but it's very palatable. It's not too far gone. He concentrates on what the human characters learn after interacting with the mystical beings and otherworldly situations. It's not like Avatar, or it's nothing extreme. They're very ordinary situations. And so I actually recommend this urban fantasy story collection, Muse and Reverie.
Okay, a very popular author. Now here's a book that I probably would not have picked up if it weren't for the fact that every Friday night my wife and I watch the TV show What Not to Wear on TLC.
Is that what she wants to see?
Yeah, I like it too.
Make you laugh?
So yes, it's Stacey London and Clinton Kelly, and they give people tips on how to look and dress better.
And do you follow them?
Yes, I like that show. So anyway, I wouldn't have looked at this book if I wasn't such a fan of that show. This show is called The 100, A Guide to the Pieces Every Stylish Woman Must Own. And it's
Tell me.
Most of them, and there's some great drawings by Ruben Toledo. Most of these are clothing and clothing-related articles, but some of them aren't. I'll just read you some, and then you get the idea of what the book's about. Each one of these selections has like 2 or 3 pages explaining what it is, why it's a classic piece, why every woman should have one, and there's a little history of each one. So, for example,
at the great illustrations from here, right on the front page.
Yes, the pictures are in that sort of 50s style of. So I'll read them. They're in alphabetical order. I'll just skip around. You get an idea of what is. So this is what every stylish woman must own: 100 pieces. Let's see, an A-line dress.
Yes.
A ballet flat, a camel coat, a caftan, a sun hat, a trench, a watch.
A trench coat, you mean?
Well, it just says trench.
It says trench?
You have to
Okay,
go there.
well, I'm not.
Mary Jane's, I'm not sure what even they
Shoes.
are. A man's white shirt, red lipstick. Let's see, wide leg trousers, a wrap dress.
Yeah, everybody looks good.
Stilettos.
Stilettos, I don't know about that.
Let's see, a motorcycle jacket, a denim jacket, there was one here, it was a cocktail ring, a cashmere sweater, that's a classic.
A cashmere coat and a cashmere sweater.
So each one of these, I'll read you one quick thing so you get the idea of what this is about. Under men's white shirt, it just gives a little history of why it's a classic look, and it gives you some examples of when, you probably can't see the picture, but there's great drawings in here. As an example of
Coco Chanel,
Yeah.
or what's the actress, Audrey Hepburn, I can just...
Yes, she's on here. So, for example, in a men's white shirt, it explains why it's a classic look, and there's a little thing here. It says, great moments in men's white shirts for women. 1953, Audrey Hepburn in Roman Holiday.
Yes.
Elizabeth Taylor in Giant, 1956. Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman, 1990. Uma Thurman in Pulp Fiction, 1994.
Oh, that's great.
So anyway, you get the idea of I just read it. It looks like a fun book. Each one of these is 2 or 3 pages. There's a couple I couldn't read, so you'll have to read the book to see them all. That's The 100, A Guide to the Pieces Every Stylish Woman Must Own.
Boy, I'm going to look at that. That sounds interesting. It really does.
You can see how many of the 100 you have, Zina.
Not many. This is Futurology. This will change everything, ideas that will shape the future, edited by John Brockman. 125 of today's leading thinkers, including Richard Dawkins, who I know, Ian McEwan, who is an author. So, and what they think is going to be, what do they say, game-changing, scientific and technical developments in the next decades that will greatly change our world, and it's all different ideas about what's going to change our world most dramatically in the science and technical fields, and mostly scientists, and a lot of them agree that it's computerization connected to brain science and the genome, genetic engineering, and how it's going to change our brains and the way we think. And it also talks about other less radical ideas. It talks about solar energy. It talks about, re-engineering body parts, that kind of thing. I like futurology. I like to get an idea of what's going to happen in the future when I'm not around. So this will change everything, ideas that will shape the future, edited by John Brockman.
And each essay is what, 2 or 3 pages long?
No.
4 or 5?
Yeah, 5 maybe. There it is, a little 5. And it's easy reading. It's not dense type or anything, so it's interesting.
Okay. I'll do one more. We're doing less and less books here each week.
Fewer.
This book is a philosophy book, a popular philosophy. I'll just say quickly, we have an excellent philosophy section. You wouldn't think, it's a very popular section, but if you need your questions answered to if you need life's questions answered, you may not get the answer, but you get the questions. This book is called Breakfast with Socrates, An Extraordinary Philosophical Journey Through Your Ordinary Day. It's written by Robert Rowland Smith, and it's sort of light and sort of humorous, but kind of serious, as philosophy is. And what he does is, each of these essays is about 15 pages, a couple or 20, a typical day. And each chapter are things like this: waking up, getting ready, traveling to work, being at work, going to the doctor, reading a book, watching TV, cooking, eating dinner. So there's 18 chapters. And sort of each chapter is a little meditation on that activity you do every day. But he brings in famous philosophers. What would they think of this activity? Or he sort of speculates on, and he brings in many for each one. For example, there's a chapter in here called Going to the Gym. So he brings in all these philosophers like Martin Heidegger. What would he think of the decline of the body and all this? So, and I think, being at work, of course, he brings in Max Weber and Karl Marx, things like that. And it's kind of written lightly, but, cooking and eating dinner, he talks about that famous philosopher and anthropologist. I can't think of his name now. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, Claude Levi-Strauss. He wrote about culture and food and everything. So he talks about him under the chapter Cooking and Eating Dinner. And it looks like kind of a fun book, but something to think about as you go through your day. And I guess if you read this book, maybe your days wouldn't be as mundane as they actually are.
Philosophy light. I like that. That's
so. And these kind of books are very popular. So
yeah, that's accessible to everyone.
Breakfast with Socrates, An Extraordinary Philosophical Journey Through Your Ordinary Day. And he brings in, everybody: Nietzsche, Plato, Socrates, obviously, Descartes, and everything. So, any more for you?
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
Well, that's it for this time. We'll see you next time on So Many Books, So Little Time.